Sarah Martinez walked through the crowded airport terminal, her small duffel bag slung over her shoulder. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across her weathered face, and her dark eyes scanned the bustling crowd with the same alertness that had kept her alive through countless missions. At 32, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that most people mistook for arrogance. The security checkpoint ahead buzzed with activity. Business travelers fumbled with laptops while families juggled crying babies and overstuffed carry-ons. Sarah approached the TSA agent, a middle-aged man with tired eyes who had probably processed thousands of passengers that week alone. "Military?" the agent asked, noticing something in her posture as she handed over her identification. Sarah nodded. "Navy." The agent's expression shifted slightly, becoming more respectful. "What's your specialty?" "Special operations," she replied simply. The man behind her in line, wearing an expensive suit and an attitude to match, let out a loud snort. "Oh, here we go. Another wannabe trying to impress people?" Sarah turned slowly, her calm gaze meeting his smirking face. The businessman was tall, probably in his 40s, with perfectly styled hair and manicured nails. Everything about him screamed money and privilege. "Excuse me?" Sarah asked quietly. "Lady, I've heard this story 100 times. Everyone's special forces these days. Navy SEALs, Green Berets, whatever, sounds cool. You probably spent your time filing paperwork in some air-conditioned office." The TSA agent looked uncomfortable, glancing between them. Other passengers had started to notice the commotion, forming a small crowd around the security checkpoint. "I never said I was a SEAL," Sarah replied, her voice steady. The businessman laughed. "Right, special operations. Same difference. Look, sweetheart, I actually know real SEALs. My brother-in-law is one." "You don't have the look." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "What look is that?" "You're too small, too pretty. SEALs are killers. They're warriors. You look like you should be serving coffee, not serving your country." The crowd had grown larger now, phones appearing as people sensed drama brewing. The TSA agent tried to intervene, but the businessman was on a roll, feeding off the attention. "I bet you can't even do 10 push-ups," he continued. "My brother-in-law could snap you in half without breaking a sweat. These stolen valor cases are getting out of hand. People like you make me sick, pretending to be heroes for attention." Sarah's jaw tightened slightly, but her voice remained calm. "I understand your concern about stolen valor. It's a real problem. Damn right it is. So why don't you drop the act before someone who actually served calls you out?" "Like you?" Sarah asked. The businessman straightened his tie. "I serve my country too, just in different ways. I pay taxes. Lots of them. I employ people. I contribute to society instead of just taking from it." An older veteran in the crowd shook his head in disgust. He recognized something in Sarah's bearing that the businessman clearly missed. The way she stood, the way her eyes constantly tracked movement around her, the small scars on her knuckles that spoke of real violence. "Sir," the TSA agent tried again. "Maybe we should—" "No, it's fine," Sarah interrupted. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small leather wallet. From it, she extracted a worn card and handed it to the agent. The TSA agent's eyes widened as he read it, his demeanor completely changed, straightening as if he'd just encountered a superior officer. "Ma'am, I apologize. There's no need for additional screening. Please proceed." The businessman wasn't finished. "What did she show you? Some fake ID she bought online? I'm telling you, she's a fraud." Sarah collected her identification and started to walk away, but the businessman grabbed her arm. The moment his hand touched her, several things happened at once. Sarah's body shifted into a combat stance without conscious thought. Her free hand moved toward his wrist in a motion that would have broken it if she'd followed through. The veteran in the crowd stepped forward, recognizing the signs of someone who'd been trained to kill. "Don't touch me," Sarah said, her voice carrying a new edge that made the businessman release her immediately, but he wasn't smart enough to back down. "I want to see that card. If it's real, prove it. Show everyone what makes you so special." Airport security had arrived, drawn by the growing crowd and raised voices. 2 officers approached, their hands resting casually on their equipment belts. "What's the problem here?" the senior officer asked. The businessman immediately launched into his accusations. "This woman is impersonating military personnel. She's claiming to be special forces, probably trying to get some kind of preferential treatment. I demand you arrest her for stolen valor." The security officer looked at Sarah, taking in her calm demeanor and the obvious tension in the crowd. "Ma'am, do you have military identification?" Sarah nodded and handed over the same card she'd shown the TSA agent. The security officer examined it carefully, his expression growing more serious with each passing second. "Sir," he said to the businessman, "I'm going to need you to step back and lower your voice." "Are you kidding me? She's the one breaking the law here. Call the MPs. Call someone who can verify whether that thing is real or not." The security officer looked at his partner, who nodded and stepped away to make a radio call. Within minutes, more security personnel arrived, and the situation began to escalate beyond a simple airport disturbance. The businessman, emboldened by what he saw as vindication, continued his tirade. "I knew it. They're taking her seriously because she's got some convincing fake documents. This is exactly what I'm talking about. These people disgrace everyone who actually served." Sarah remained silent throughout the ordeal, her face showing no emotion as more officials arrived. The crowd had grown to nearly 50 people, all watching the drama unfold. Some were recording with their phones, already composing social media posts about the stolen valor case they were witnessing. A military police officer arrived 20 minutes later, his uniform crisp and his demeanor all business. He spoke briefly with airport security before approaching Sarah. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with me while we sort this out." Sarah nodded without argument. As she was led away, the businessman called out triumphantly, "I told you she was fake. Thank you for doing the right thing, officer." But the MP didn't acknowledge him. Something about Sarah's documentation had raised flags that went far beyond simple verification procedures. Flags that would soon reach the highest levels of Naval Special Warfare Command. The interrogation room at the airport security office was small and sterile, with gray walls and a single metal table. Sarah sat calmly in a plastic chair, her hands folded in her lap while 3 different officials shuffled papers and made phone calls. The businessman from the terminal paced outside the glass window, occasionally pressing his face against it to peer inside. Detective Mike Rodriguez from the airport police had seen many cases of stolen valor over his 15-year career. Usually they were easy to spot. Nervous energy, inconsistent stories, fake documents that fell apart under basic scrutiny. But something about this case felt different from the moment he walked into the room. Sarah answered every question with quiet precision. Her service number rolled off her tongue without hesitation. She knew details about naval protocol that weren't easily Googled. When asked about her unit, she provided information that seemed authentic but was classified enough that Rodriguez couldn't immediately verify it through normal channels. "The problem, Ms. Martinez," Rodriguez explained, "is that your documentation is setting off some red flags in our system. It's triggering security protocols I've never seen before." "I understand," Sarah replied simply. "Most people in your situation would be more upset. They'd be demanding lawyers, making phone calls, protesting their innocence." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "Would that help?" Rodriguez had to admit it wouldn't. The wheels were already in motion, and senior officials from multiple agencies were now involved. Her case had been escalated to levels that made him uncomfortable. Outside, the businessman was giving an impromptu interview to a local news reporter who had caught wind of the story. "This is exactly the problem with our society today," he declared, adjusting his tie for the camera. "People think they can lie about military service to get special treatment. My brother-in-law is a real SEAL, and he would be disgusted by this woman's behavior." The reporter, a young woman named Jessica Chen, had covered many human interest stories, but something about this one felt off. The military officials who had arrived weren't treating it like a typical stolen valor case. Their body language suggested they were dealing with something much more serious. "Has the woman's identity been confirmed?" Jessica asked. The businessman smiled confidently. "They're working on it, but I can tell you right now she's a fake. I know real warriors when I see them, and she's not one." Inside the security office, Admiral Patricia Hayes received a phone call that interrupted her dinner with her family. The voice on the other end was strained, belonging to her aide who rarely called during off-duty hours. "Admiral, we have a situation at Denver International Airport. A woman claiming to be military is being held for possible stolen valor, but her documentation is triggering some very sensitive security flags." Hayes set down her fork, her stomach tightening. "What kind of flags?" "The kind that requires your direct authorization to discuss, ma'am." "I'll be there in an hour." The Admiral's arrival changed everything. She swept into the airport security office like a force of nature, her silver hair pulled back in a perfect bun, and her uniform bearing decorations that made everyone in the room stand straighter. Rodriguez approached her nervously. "Admiral Hayes, thank you for coming. I'm Detective Rodriguez, and I have to say this is highly unusual. We've never had a stolen valor case require this level of—" "Where is she?" Hayes interrupted. "In interrogation room 2, ma'am. But I should warn you, she's been very calm throughout this whole process, almost eerily calm. It's not what we typically see from people facing these charges." Hayes nodded grimly. She had a sinking feeling she knew exactly why Sarah Martinez remained calm under pressure. It was the same reason Hayes had driven across the city on a moment's notice instead of handling this through normal channels. Through the one-way mirror, Hayes observed Sarah for several minutes without speaking. The younger woman sat perfectly still, her posture alert but relaxed, her eyes occasionally tracking the movement of people outside the room. It was the bearing of someone who had been trained to remain calm under interrogation, someone who understood that panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. "How long has she been here?" Hayes asked. 3 hours, ma'am." "Has she requested an attorney?" "No, ma'am. She's been completely cooperative. Almost like she's waiting for something." Hayes understood. Sarah was waiting for someone with the right clearance level to review her file, someone who would understand that her documentation wasn't fake. It was classified at levels that most military personnel never encountered. "I need everyone except Detective Rodriguez to leave the room," Hayes ordered. The other officials filed out, looking confused and slightly offended. Rodriguez remained behind, sensing that he was about to become privy to information far above his normal security clearance. "Detective, what I'm about to tell you cannot leave this room. Do you understand?" Rodriguez nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure he wanted to hear what came next. Hayes opened a secure tablet and accessed files that required her biometric identification. Sarah Martinez's documentation is triggering security flags because her unit technically doesn't exist on paper. She's part of a program so classified that most admirals don't know about it. "I don't understand, ma'am." "Think of it as a tier above the SEALs, above Delta Force, above anything you've heard of. These operators work on missions that never make the news, against threats that the public never learns about." Rodriguez felt his mouth go dry. "And the businessman who accused her?" "Has no idea how close he came to a very serious national security incident." Through the glass, they watched Sarah check her watch, a simple black timepiece that looked ordinary but contained technology Rodriguez couldn't imagine. "The problem," Hayes continued, "is that this has already become public. There's a news crew outside, social media posts are spreading, and we now have a classified operator whose cover has been blown by a man who thinks he's protecting military honor." "What happens next?" Hayes closed the tablet and straightened her uniform. "I go in there and fix this mess, and you learn why some military secrets are kept secret for very good reasons." As she reached for the door handle, Hayes paused. "Detective, how much do you trust the media to handle sensitive information responsibly?" Rodriguez thought about the news crew outside, already crafting their story about stolen valor and military fraud. "Not at all, ma'am." "Good. Because what happens in the next few minutes is going to determine whether a very dangerous woman remains one of our greatest assets or becomes one of our biggest problems." The interrogation room door opened, and Sarah looked up to see Admiral Hayes enter. For the first time in hours, her carefully controlled expression showed a flicker of emotion, relief mixed with something that might have been apprehension. "Admiral," Sarah said quietly, standing at attention despite not being in uniform. Hayes gestured for her to sit back down. "At ease, Martinez. We have a problem." Detective Rodriguez remained by the door, still trying to process everything he'd learned in the past few minutes. He watched as the dynamic in the room completely shifted. The woman who had been treated as a suspected criminal suddenly commanded respect from one of the highest-ranking naval officers he'd ever encountered. "How bad is it?" Sarah asked. Hayes pulled out her tablet and showed Sarah the news coverage already spreading across social media. The businessman was being hailed as a patriotic citizen who had exposed a fraud. Videos of Sarah being led away by security were going viral with hashtags like Dahmer, Stolen Valor, and Fake Soldier. "Your cover is blown," Hayes said bluntly. 3 years of careful construction, gone in 30 minutes because some privileged civilian decided to play military police. Sarah studied the screen, her jaw tightening as she read the comments. Thousands of people were calling for her prosecution, sharing the videos, and praising the businessman for his vigilance. "Sir, my current mission parameters are hereby suspended," Hayes interrupted. "As of this moment, you're officially on administrative leave pending a full security review." Rodriguez cleared his throat nervously. "Admiral, I hate to interrupt, but there are reporters outside asking for official statements. They want to know if charges will be filed." Hayes turned to him with an expression that could have frozen fire. "Detective, I need you to understand something. The woman sitting in this room has killed more terrorists than most people have seen movies. She has prevented attacks that would have made 9/11 look like a minor incident. She has sacrificed everything, her identity, her relationships, her normal life, to keep people like you and me safe while we sleep." Rodriguez looked at Sarah with new eyes. She didn't look like a killer, but then again, he supposed that was the point. "The man who accused her," Hayes continued, "has potentially compromised ongoing operations that have taken years to develop. His brother-in-law may be a SEAL, but that doesn't give him the authority to unmask deep-cover operatives." Through the window, they could see the businessman still holding court with reporters, his chest puffed with righteous indignation. He had no idea that his moment of civic pride was creating ripple effects that reached into the highest levels of national security. "What are my orders, sir?" Sarah asked. Hayes was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing options that Rodriguez couldn't begin to understand. "For now, we maintain the cover story. As far as the world knows, you're being investigated for stolen valor. But I need to know, are you willing to burn your civilian identity to protect the program?" Sarah didn't hesitate. "Yes, sir. Even if it means never being able to return to normal life? Even if it means becoming a ghost?" "Sir, I've been a ghost for 3 years already." Rodriguez watched this exchange with growing discomfort. He was witnessing conversations about national security matters so far above his clearance that he wondered if he'd ever be allowed to discuss them again. A knock on the door interrupted them. Another officer entered and whispered something to Hayes that made her face go pale. "What is it?" Sarah asked, reading the Admiral's expression. "The situation just became much more complicated. Our intelligence indicates that hostile foreign actors have taken notice of the news coverage. They're trying to identify you." The weight of this revelation settled over the room like a heavy blanket. What had started as an airport argument between strangers was now a potential international incident. "Sir," Rodriguez spoke up hesitantly, "what exactly does that mean for everyone involved?" Hayes looked at him with something that might have been sympathy. "It means that the businessman outside who thinks he's a hero may have just signed death warrants, not just for Sarah, but for everyone in her operational network." Sarah's expression hardened.
"How long before they piece it together?"
"Our analysts estimate 48 hours, maybe less. Foreign intelligence services have gotten very good at using social media and facial recognition technology." Rodriguez felt sick. Jesus Christ. This is all because some guy wanted to show off. "This is because a civilian interfered with matters he didn't understand," Hayes corrected. "But now we have to deal with the consequences." Outside, the businessman was giving another interview, this time to a national news network that had picked up the story. He was describing in detail how he had identified the fake soldier and demanding that she be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. "He has no idea what he's done," Sarah observed, watching him through the window. "No, he doesn't. And that ignorance may cost lives." Hayes made a decision that would change everything for everyone in that room. "Detective Rodriguez, I'm about to read you into a classified program. Once I do this, your life will never be the same. You'll be subject to periodic polygraph examinations. Your communications will be monitored, and you'll carry secrets that could get people killed if they're revealed. Do you understand?" Rodriguez looked at Sarah, then back at the Admiral. He thought about his quiet life, his plans to retire in a few years, his simple world of airport security and routine investigations. "Do I have a choice?" "Not really. You're already too deep in this to back out safely." Rodriguez nodded grimly. "Then I understand, ma'am." Hayes opened her tablet again and began accessing files that would shatter everything Rodriguez thought he knew about how the world really worked. "Gentlemen, let me tell you about a program that doesn't exist, run by people who were never born, to fight enemies that the public will never know about." As she spoke, Sarah watched the businessman outside, still basking in his moment of fame, completely unaware that he had just triggered events that would reshape the lives of everyone in the room, and possibly end some of them. The interrogation room door opened, and Sarah looked up to see Admiral Hayes enter. For the first time in hours, her carefully controlled expression showed a flicker of emotion, relief mixed with something that might have been apprehension. "Admiral," Sarah said quietly, standing at attention despite not being in uniform. Hayes gestured for her to sit back down. "At ease, Martinez. We have a problem." Detective Rodriguez remained by the door, still trying to process everything he'd learned in the past few minutes. He watched as the dynamic in the room completely shifted. The woman who had been treated as a suspected criminal suddenly commanded respect from one of the highest-ranking naval officers he'd ever encountered. "How bad is it?" Sarah asked. Hayes pulled out her tablet and showed Sarah the news coverage already spreading across social media. The businessman was being hailed as a patriotic citizen who had exposed a fraud. Videos of Sarah being led away by security were going viral with hashtags like Dahmer, Stolen Valor, and Fake Soldier. "Your cover is blown," Hayes said bluntly. 3 years of careful construction, gone in 30 minutes because some privileged civilian decided to play military police. Sarah studied the screen, her jaw tightening as she read the comments. Thousands of people were calling for her prosecution, sharing the videos, and praising the businessman for his vigilance. "Sir, my current mission parameters are hereby suspended," Hayes interrupted. "As of this moment, you're officially on administrative leave pending a full security review." Rodriguez cleared his throat nervously. "Admiral, I hate to interrupt, but there are reporters outside asking for official statements. They want to know if charges will be filed." Hayes turned to him with an expression that could have frozen fire. "Detective, I need you to understand something. The woman sitting in this room has killed more terrorists than most people have seen movies. She has prevented attacks that would have made 9/11 look like a minor incident. She has sacrificed everything, her identity, her relationships, her normal life, to keep people like you and me safe while we sleep." Rodriguez looked at Sarah with new eyes. She didn't look like a killer, but then again, he supposed that was the point. "The man who accused her," Hayes continued, "has potentially compromised ongoing operations that have taken years to develop. His brother-in-law may be a SEAL, but that doesn't give him the authority to unmask deep-cover operatives." Through the window, they could see the businessman still holding court with reporters, his chest puffed with righteous indignation. He had no idea that his moment of civic pride was creating ripple effects that reached into the highest levels of national security. "What are my orders, sir?" Sarah asked. Hayes was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing options that Rodriguez couldn't begin to understand. "For now, we maintain the cover story. As far as the world knows, you're being investigated for stolen valor. But I need to know, are you willing to burn your civilian identity to protect the program?" Sarah didn't hesitate. "Yes, sir. Even if it means never being able to return to normal life. Even if it means becoming a ghost. Sir, I've been a ghost for 3 years already." Rodriguez watched this exchange with growing discomfort. He was witnessing conversations about national security matters so far above his clearance that he wondered if he'd ever be allowed to discuss them again. A knock on the door interrupted them. Another officer entered and whispered something to Hayes that made her face go pale. "What is it?" Sarah asked, reading the Admiral's expression. "The situation just became much more complicated. Our intelligence indicates that hostile foreign actors have taken notice of the news coverage. They're trying to identify you." The weight of this revelation settled over the room like a heavy blanket. What had started as an airport argument between strangers was now a potential international incident. "Sir," Rodriguez spoke up hesitantly. "What exactly does that mean for everyone involved?" Hayes looked at him with something that might have been sympathy. "It means that the businessman outside who thinks he's a hero may have just signed death warrants, not just for Sarah, but for everyone in her operational network." Sarah's expression hardened.
How long before they piece it together?
"Our analysts estimate 48 hours, maybe less. Foreign intelligence services have gotten very good at using social media and facial recognition technology." Rodriguez felt sick. Jesus Christ. This is all because some guy wanted to show off. "This is because a civilian interfered with matters he didn't understand," Hayes corrected. "But now we have to deal with the consequences." Outside, the businessman was giving another interview, this time to a national news network that had picked up the story. He was describing in detail how he had identified the fake soldier and demanding that she be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. He has no idea what he's done, Sarah observed, watching him through the window. No, he doesn't. And that ignorance may cost lives. Hayes made a decision that would change everything for everyone in that room. Detective Rodriguez, I'm about to read you into a classified program. Once I do this, your life will never be the same. You'll be subject to periodic polygraph examinations. Your communications will be monitored, and you'll carry secrets that could get people killed if they're revealed. Do you understand? Rodriguez looked at Sarah, then back at the Admiral. He thought about his quiet life, his plans to retire in a few years, his simple world of airport security and routine investigations. Do I have a choice? Not really. You're already too deep in this to back out safely. Rodriguez nodded grimly. Then I understand, ma'am. Hayes opened her tablet again and began accessing files that would shatter everything Rodriguez thought he knew about how the world really worked. Gentlemen, let me tell you about a program that doesn't exist, run by people who were never born, to fight enemies that the public will never know about. As she spoke, Sarah watched the businessman outside, still basking in his moment of fame, completely unaware that he had just triggered events that would reshape the lives of everyone in the room, and possibly end some of them. 3 days after the airport incident, Robert Kellerman sat in his home office, basking in the attention his heroic act had generated. His phone hadn't stopped ringing with interview requests, and his social media following had exploded overnight. The businessman who had exposed a military fraud was now being hailed as a patriotic citizen across conservative media outlets. His wife, Margaret, knocked on his office door with a concerned expression. "Rob, there are some men here to see you. They say they're with the FBI." Robert straightened his tie and smiled, probably coming to thank him officially for his service to the country. He'd been expecting some kind of recognition from law enforcement. 2 agents in dark suits waited in his living room, their expressions serious and professional. The lead agent, a tall man with graying hair, extended his hand. "Mr. Kellerman, I'm Agent Collins, and this is Agent Watson. We need to discuss the incident at Denver International Airport." Robert gestured for them to sit, his chest puffing with pride. "Of course, gentlemen. I'm happy to help however I can. I assume you're here about the fraudulent military claims?" Agent Collins exchanged a glance with his partner. "Sir, we need to discuss some developments in that case. Information has come to light that changes the nature of the situation significantly." "What kind of information?" "The kind that requires us to have this conversation in a more secure environment," Agent Watson replied. "We'd like you to come with us for a briefing." Robert's excitement grew. A briefing meant official recognition, maybe even a commendation ceremony. Let me just tell my wife. An hour later, Robert found himself in the same secure facility where Sarah had been held, though he didn't know that. The briefing room looked official and important, with government seals on the walls and secure communication equipment he didn't recognize. Admiral Hayes entered the room, her uniform bearing more decorations than Robert had ever seen in person. He stood automatically, recognizing authority even if he didn't understand its full scope. "Mr. Kellerman, I'm Admiral Hayes. Please sit down." Robert remained standing, extending his hand. "Admiral, it's an honor. I assume you're here to discuss my actions at the airport. I'm glad I could help expose that fraud." Hayes didn't take his hand. "Mr. Kellerman, the woman you accused of stolen valor is one of the most highly decorated special operations soldiers in the history of the United States military." Robert's smile faltered. "I'm sorry, what?" "Sarah Martinez has served with distinction in classified operations for over 8 years. Her documentation wasn't fake. It was classified at levels that most military personnel never encounter." The color drained from Robert's face. But she couldn't be. She was too small too female?" Hayes interrupted. "Mr. Kellerman, that woman has eliminated more high-value terrorist targets than entire conventional units. She speaks 6 languages fluently and holds advanced degrees in both chemistry and computer science." Robert slumped into his chair, his mind struggling to process this information. If that's true, then why was she detained? Why didn't she just explain? Because explaining would have compromised ongoing operations and potentially gotten people killed. The moment she revealed her true status, her cover was blown and years of careful intelligence work were destroyed. Agent Collins leaned forward. Mr. Kellerman, your actions have had consequences that extend far beyond what you could imagine. What kind of consequences? Hayes opened a tablet and showed him a map covered with red markers. Each of these represents an intelligence asset that had to be extracted from the field, because your public accusation compromised their safety. 15 people whose lives were turned upside down because you decided to play military police. Robert stared at the map, his stomach churning. I was trying to protect military honor. My brother-in-law is a SEAL, and he always says, "Your brother-in-law," Hayes interrupted, "serves with distinction, but he operates in conventional units with conventional cover stories. Sarah Martinez operates in a realm of special operations that your brother-in-law has never heard of, and never will." Agent Watson placed a stack of photographs on the table. "Mr. Kellerman, these are surveillance photos taken outside your home, your office, and your children's school over the past 24 hours. Robert looked at the photos, his blood running cold. Strangers with cameras, people sitting in cars across from his house, unfamiliar faces near his daughter's playground. "Who are they?" "Foreign intelligence operatives and terrorist organizations," Collins explained. "They're trying to determine your connection to Sarah Martinez and whether you might have additional information about her operations." "Jesus Christ," Robert whispered. "My family is currently under protection," Hayes assured him. "But Mr. Kellerman, you need to understand that your moment of civic pride has created an international incident." Agent Collins pulled up another document on the tablet. 3 different terrorist organizations have placed bounties on Sarah Martinez's head, based on her identification from the airport incident. The combined total is over $5 million. Robert felt like he was going to be sick. "I didn't know." "How could I have known?" "You couldn't have," Hayes admitted. "But that doesn't change the consequences. Where is she now?" "Is she safe?" "Sarah Martinez, as far as the world is concerned, no longer exists. The woman you accused of fraud has had to completely disappear to stay alive." Robert buried his face in his hands. "This is insane. I was just trying to do the right thing." "The right thing," Hayes said quietly, "would have been to mind your own business." Agent Watson leaned back in his chair. "Mr. Kellerman, we need to discuss your immediate future. Your face has been all over the news in connection with this case. That makes you a person of interest to the same people who are hunting Sarah Martinez." "What does that mean?" "It means your family is in danger," Collins said bluntly. "Not just from foreign operatives, but from domestic extremists who believe you're part of some government conspiracy." Hayes showed him another set of photos on her tablet. "These are screenshots from social media posts made in the last 48 hours. Some people are calling you a hero for exposing stolen valor. Others are claiming you're a government plant who helped cover up military secrets." Robert scrolled through the images, his horror growing with each post. Death threats mixed with praise. Conspiracy theories about government cover-ups. His home address posted publicly with suggestions that patriots should pay him a visit. "My God," he whispered. "How did this spiral so far out of control?" "Because in today's world, a single social media post can reach millions of people in minutes," Hayes explained. "And once information is public, you can't take it back." Agent Collins opened a briefcase and pulled out several official-looking documents. "Mr. Kellerman, we're prepared to offer you and your family protective relocation through the Witness Protection Program." "Witness protection?" "But I'm not a witness to any crime. You're a civilian who became entangled in classified operations through no fault of your own. But the reality is that your current identity is now a liability to your family's safety." Robert stared at the documents, realizing that his life as he knew it was over. "What about my business? My employees? Everything I've built?" "Would need to be abandoned," Watson said quietly. "New identities, new location, new careers for you and your wife." The room fell silent as Robert absorbed the magnitude of what he was being told. His moment of righteous indignation at the airport had destroyed not only Sarah Martinez's life, but his own family's future. "There's something else," Hayes said reluctantly. "Sarah Martinez has requested a meeting with you." Robert looked up sharply. "She wants to see me? Why?" "She wants you to understand the full scope of what your actions have cost. Not just her, but everyone whose lives were affected by the security breach you inadvertently created." "Is that safe?" Collins almost smiled. "Mr. Kellerman, if Sarah Martinez wanted to hurt you, you'd already be dead. She's requesting this meeting as a courtesy, not a threat." Robert thought about his wife, his children, The life they'd built together, all of it now hanging by a thread because he'd decided to confront a stranger at an airport. If I meet with her, will it help? Can any of this be fixed? Hayes shook her head. The damage is done. Sarah's cover is blown permanently, your family's safety is compromised, and multiple ongoing operations have been destroyed. But perhaps understanding the human cost will help you make better decisions going forward. What do you mean? Agent Watson pulled out another document. Mr. Kellerman, you've received dozens of interview requests since the airport incident. Book deals, movie rights, speaking engagements. People want to hear your story, and we need you to turn them all down. Every interview you give, every detail you share makes the situation worse for everyone involved. Robert nodded slowly. I understand, do you? Hayes asked pointedly. Because your social media posts suggest you were enjoying the attention quite a bit before we had this conversation. Robert felt his face flush with shame. I thought I was doing something good. I thought I was protecting military honor. Military honor, Hayes said, is protected by people like Sarah Martinez who sacrifice everything, including recognition for their service, to keep this country safe. True military honor often goes unnoticed and unrewarded because the most important missions never become public knowledge. Agent Collins stood up. Mr. Kellerman, we need your decision about the meeting with Sarah Martinez. She's currently being prepared for deep black operations that will take her completely off the grid. This would be your only opportunity to understand what your actions have cost. Robert looked around the secure room, thinking about Sarah Martinez somewhere in the building, preparing to disappear forever because of his interference. Yes, he said quietly. I want to meet her. I need to understand what I've done. Hayes nodded grimly. Very well, but Mr. Kellerman, I need you to prepare yourself. The woman you're about to meet has killed more enemies of this country than you have fingers and toes. She sacrificed everything for missions you'll never hear about, and your actions have cost her the only normal life she had left. As they prepared to bring Sarah into the room, Robert Kellerman sat in silence, finally beginning to grasp that his moment of civic pride had triggered consequences that would echo through multiple lives for years to come. The hero narrative he'd constructed for himself was crumbling, replaced by the stark reality of unintended destruction caused by his arrogance and ignorance. The door opened, and Sarah Martinez entered the briefing room with the same quiet confidence Robert remembered from the airport. But now, knowing who she really was, he saw details he'd missed before. The way she automatically assessed the room's exits, how her eyes tracked everyone's positions, the barely visible scars on her knuckles that spoke of violence he couldn't imagine. She sat across from him without ceremony, her dark eyes meeting his with an intensity that made him squirm. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Mr. Kellerman, she said finally, her voice calm but carrying an edge that hadn't been there at the airport. Ms. Martinez, he replied, then caught himself. I mean, I don't know your real rank or... My real name is Sarah Martinez, she interrupted. The rank doesn't matter anymore since I'll never be able to use it again. Robert felt shame wash over him. I owe you an apology. A huge apology. I had no idea. No, you didn't. She leaned forward slightly. But that's not why I asked to meet with you. Then why? Sarah opened a tablet and placed it between them. On the screen was a photograph of a young woman, maybe 25, with kind eyes and a bright smile. This is Maria Santos. She was a CIA asset working undercover in a terrorist cell in Syria. Because my cover was blown, her extraction was compromised. She was executed 3 days ago. Robert stared at the photo, his stomach dropping. Because of what I did? Because the terrorist organization that killed her realized that if one American deep cover operative had been exposed, others might be compromised too. They started checking everyone with suspicious backgrounds. Sarah swiped to another photo. This is James Chen, a military contractor who provided intelligence from inside a weapons trafficking network. When the network started security sweeps after my exposure, they found him. He's missing, presumed dead. Each photo was like a physical blow. Robert watched as Sarah showed him image after image of people whose lives had been destroyed by the cascade of security failures triggered by the airport incident. How many? He whispered. So far? 11 confirmed dead, 6 missing, 23 forced to abandon long-term operations. She continued swiping through photos. These are the ones we know about. There are probably others in cells we haven't heard from yet. Robert's hands were shaking. I didn't know. How could I have known? You couldn't have, Sarah agreed. But that's not the point. The point is that you made assumptions about things you didn't understand and acted on those assumptions without considering the consequences. I thought I was protecting military honor. Sarah's expression hardened. Military honor isn't protected by civilians confronting strangers in airports. It's protected by people who sacrifice everything, their identities, their relationships, their lives, for missions that will never be acknowledged. She showed him another photo, this one of a man in his 50s with graying hair and kind eyes. This is Colonel Martinez, my father. He's a decorated Marine who served 3 tours in Iraq. He doesn't know what I really do for the military because it's classified above his level. As far as he knows, I'm a desk clerk at the Pentagon. Robert looked confused. Why are you telling me this? Because when this story broke, he saw his daughter being arrested for stolen valor on national television. He spent the last 3 days trying to reach me, trying to understand how his little girl could disgrace the family's military tradition. The weight of this revelation hit Robert like a physical blow. He doesn't know the truth. He can't know the truth. My real service record is classified at levels that would require him to give up his retirement and submit to lifelong monitoring just to be briefed. So he believes his daughter is either a fraud or a criminal. Sarah's voice remained steady, but Robert could see the pain in her eyes. What about your mother? She died when I was 12. Car accident. Sarah closed the tablet. My father is the only family I have left, and your actions have destroyed my relationship with him forever. Robert felt tears building in his eyes. There has to be something I can do, some way to fix this. There isn't. Even if we told him the truth, he could never speak about it. He'd have to pretend for the rest of his life that he believes his daughter is a disgrace to everything he taught her to value. The room fell silent except for the quiet hum of the ventilation system. Robert struggled to find words that could express his remorse, but everything felt inadequate. What happens to you now? He finally asked. I become someone new. Deep black operations for the rest of my career, however long that lasts. No contact with anyone from my previous life. No possibility of normal relationships. No chance of ever having a family. How old are you? 32. Robert thought about his own daughter, just 26 and planning her wedding next year. Sarah was barely older, but her chance at a normal life had just been stripped away. What about after? When you're done with the military? Sarah almost smiled, but there was no humor in it. Mr. Kellerman, people in my line of work don't retire. We die in action, or we disappear so completely that death becomes a technicality. Agent Collins, who had been silent throughout the exchange, spoke up. Sarah, you don't have to. Yes, I do. She looked at Robert intently. He needs to understand what his moment of civic pride actually cost. She showed him one more photo on the tablet. It was Sarah herself, but younger, maybe 25. She was in a wedding dress, standing next to a handsome man in a Navy uniform. This was taken 4 years ago. His name was David. He was a conventional SEAL, nothing classified about his service. We were supposed to get married, but I couldn't go through with it. Why not? Because my real job would have put him in danger. People in my position can't have normal relationships. We can't have families. We can't have lives outside the mission. Robert stared at the photo, seeing the happiness in both their faces. Where is he now? Married to someone else, 2 kids. He deserved better than what I could give him. Sarah took the tablet back. But I held on to the hope that someday, when I was done with deep operations, maybe I could have something like that. A normal life. A family. And now? Now that option is gone forever. Thanks to your intervention, I can never safely be around civilians who aren't part of the intelligence community. Robert felt like he was drowning in guilt. Every word Sarah spoke added another weight to the burden of what he'd done. Why are you telling me all this? He asked. Because you need to understand that actions have consequences beyond what we can see. You thought you were confronting one woman about a personal lie. In reality, you were interfering with a complex intelligence operation that took years to establish and involved dozens of people. Sarah stood up, preparing to leave. Wait, Robert called out. What can I do? How can I make this right? Sarah turned back to him, her expression softer than it had been throughout their conversation. You can stop talking to reporters. You can turn down the book deals and the speaking engagements. You can go into witness protection with your family and disappear quietly. That's all? Mr. Kellerman, the damage is done. The only thing you can do now is prevent it from getting worse. As she reached for the door, Robert spoke one more time. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry." Sarah paused without turning around. "I know you are, but sorry doesn't bring back the dead, and it doesn't give me back the life you took away." She left the room, and Robert sat alone with the weight of understanding what his arrogance had truly cost. 6 months later, Robert Kellerman stood on the porch of a modest house in suburban Montana, watching his daughter play in the backyard with children from their new neighborhood. His name was now Robert Carlson, and his family had adapted to their new lives better than he'd expected. Margaret worked as a teacher at the local elementary school, and their daughter had made friends quickly despite the upheaval. But Robert couldn't shake the weight of what he'd learned in that secure briefing room. Every night he thought about Sarah Martinez and the lives that had been lost because of his moment of righteous indignation. The guilt had become a constant companion, a reminder that good intentions without wisdom could cause devastating harm. His phone buzzed with a text from Agent Collins, who maintained periodic contact as part of their protection arrangement. "Turn on the news. Channel 7. Robert found the remote and switched to the local news station. The anchor was discussing a story about a terrorist attack that had been prevented in Eastern Europe. No details, no specifics, just a brief mention that intelligence services had thwarted a major operation that could have killed hundreds of civilians. The report lasted less than 2 minutes, buried between segments about local politics and weather. Robert knew that somewhere behind that story was probably Sarah Martinez or someone like her, risking everything to prevent tragedies that would never make headlines. Later that evening, as his family slept, Robert sat in his home office and opened his laptop. For months he'd been writing, not the book that publishers had wanted, but something else entirely. A warning, a cautionary tale about the dangers of assumption and the courage required to mind one's own business. He'd never publish it under his real name, and he might never publish it at all. But writing it helped him process the magnitude of his mistake and maybe somehow prevent others from making similar ones. Meanwhile, 3 time zones away, a woman with short black hair and different colored eyes sat in a coffee shop in Prague, reading intelligence reports on her encrypted tablet. She went by Elena Vasquez now, complete with documented history and established cover identity. The surgical alterations to her face had been subtle but effective, enough to defeat facial recognition systems while maintaining her natural appearance. Sarah Martinez had ceased to exist on paper 6 months ago. Elena Vasquez had emerged from deep cover training as one of the most effective intelligence operatives in the Western world. She spoke fluent Czech and Russian now in addition to her previous languages, and had established herself as a freelance journalist covering Eastern European politics. Her real work, of course, was far more dangerous. The terrorist cell she was infiltrating believed she was a sympathetic reporter looking to tell their story to Western media. They had no idea that Elena had already identified their funding sources, weapon suppliers, and planned targets. Within the week, coordinated strikes across 4 countries would roll up the entire network. It was exactly the kind of mission she'd been born for. But Sarah found herself thinking more often about the life she'd given up. Not just the life Robert Kellerman had cost her, but the choices she'd made long before that airport encounter. Her secure phone buzzed with a message from Admiral Hayes. Target neutralized. Extraction in 48 hours. Sarah smiled slightly. The mission was ahead of schedule, which meant she'd done her job well. In 2 days, she'd disappear from Prague, and Elena Vasquez would become just another identity in a file that officially didn't exist. But tonight, she allowed herself a few minutes to remember who she used to be. Her father had tried to contact her dozens of times after the airport incident. She'd watched from afar as he defended her to anyone who would listen, insisting that his daughter could never be guilty of stolen valor. The pain in his voice during television interviews had been almost unbearable to witness. He would never know that she'd heard every word. Sarah had also monitored David's life through careful digital observation. His wife was pregnant again, their 3rd child. He coached Little League on weekends and had been promoted to senior chief. He looked happy in the photos she occasionally accessed through social media surveillance. He deserved that happiness. He deserved a wife who could give him a normal life, which was something Sarah could never have provided. As she prepared to leave the coffee shop, Sarah noticed a young couple at a nearby table. The man was obviously military. Even in civilian clothes, his bearing gave him away. His girlfriend was showing him something on her phone, probably wedding venues or engagement rings. For just a moment, Sarah allowed herself to imagine what that felt like. Planning a future with someone, making decisions based on love instead of operational security, building something together instead of constantly preparing to disappear. Then she closed her laptop and walked away. Elena Vasquez had work to do. Back in Montana, Robert finished his writing session and prepared for bed. Tomorrow was his daughter's birthday, and they were planning a small party with their new neighbors. It would be a normal, quiet celebration, the kind of life he'd never fully appreciated before understanding how fragile such normalcy could be. As he turned off the lights, Robert said a quiet prayer for Sarah Martinez wherever she was. He prayed that she was safe, that she was successful in whatever mission she was undertaking, and that someday, somehow, she might find a way back to a life that included more than duty and sacrifice. He would never know if his prayers were heard. In Prague, Elena Vasquez disappeared into the night, carrying secrets that could topple governments and prevent wars. She moved through shadows cast by streetlights, invisible to the surveillance cameras that covered the city, a ghost in service of a country that would never acknowledge her existence. The woman who had been detained for claiming SEAL status was gone forever. In her place was something far more dangerous and infinitely more valuable, a weapon forged by circumstance and tempered by sacrifice, serving in ways that heroes in movies could never imagine. And in a briefing room in Washington, Admiral Hayes reviewed operational reports that never mentioned Sarah Martinez, but detailed the systematic dismantling of terrorist networks across 3 continents. The efficiency was remarkable, the success rate unprecedented. Hayes closed the files and locked them away, knowing that somewhere in the world, the woman whose life had been destroyed by a stranger's arrogance was now saving lives that would never know they'd been saved. It was, Hayes reflected, exactly what Sarah Martinez had always been meant to do, even if she could never receive recognition for doing it.